I used to work at a Walmart. The Walmart I worked at was open 24 hours. Back then, due to my kid's school schedule, I would work overnight shifts so that I would be available to drop him off and pick him up. I would do a 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift every night. During the day, I'd sleep, take care of my son, and work my second job. Some days I was exhausted. A lot during this time in my life. It wasn't a great time. I had to do what I could to cover rent though. This Walmart was one of the bigger ones. It was a supercenter, not just a grocery store, so it had everything. It was one of the few open 24 hours around here. I think Co changed that though. When I got there around 10 o'clock this one cold night, there was still a decent amount of shoppers in the store. A lot of people would come in for some late-night shopping. As the hours would pass, it would of course quiet down tremendously. The late hours of the night would attract a lot of weirder characters, weirder than the usual ones during the day. Into the AM hours of the night, there was only one person working the front of the store, and he or she would be at the self-checkout registers. There were no regular registers open this late. There would also be a couple of stock workers on the floor, which was what I did then. There would be a couple warehouse workers in the back who I really didn't ever interact with. They did their own thing, and then there's just the night manager on duty. I was in the cereal aisle doing my usual stock work. I noticed a customer walk past the aisle, then seconds later he stepped back into view at the end of the aisle, stopped, and looked down at me. When I looked back at him, he started looking at the cereal. The guy had curly hair. I couldn't gauge his ethnicity, honestly. He had a black backpack on that looked like it was stuffed to the brim with God knows what. He awkwardly lingered in the cereal aisle for a minute, apparently looking at the granola bars. Then he came a little closer to me and asked me where the bread is. I pointed him in the right direction. He said thanks and slowly walked away out of the aisle. I watched him walk away, and he had a very noticeable waddle in his walk. When he was out of sight, he was out of mind, though. The problem was that he wasn't out of sight for long. I was in the cereal aisle for quite some time, and I started noticing that every few minutes that guy would slowly pass by the aisle, looking down in this direction. He wasn't holding anything. He didn't get any bread. He just had on his big, sketchy backpack. I started working faster just so I could finish this aisle and move away from him. When I was done, I brought the empty U-boat platform back to the warehouse, where I grabbed another U-boat full of boxes ready to stock. I purposely picked an aisle far away from the cereal aisle. I was now in the chips aisle. This is also about 45 minutes after initial contact with that guy, so there should have been no way he was still here. But I was wrong. He found me. I was rotating the newer bags of chips behind the older ones on the shelf. And then I looked to my right, and that guy was at the end of the aisle, creeping again. He still had nothing in his hands. This man had been creeping around the store for almost an hour. He then finally approached me, as I was dreading he would. I tried to look away until he started to speak. I don't remember word for word what he said, but basically, he said that he's been checking me out, and he couldn't resist coming up to me, telling me how beautiful I am. I responded as politely as I could. I did a fake little laugh and said no thank you, that's very sweet. He didn't stop there, though. He asked a bunch of personal questions, like where I'm from. I gave fake answers to everything. This guy absolutely reeked, and his breath was awful. I was genuinely repulsed. He asked for my number, and I said I'm seeing someone. He said there's nothing wrong with us just being friends. To get him to leave me alone, I gave him a fake number. I then told him I really can't be talking to anyone while I'm working. He made some creepy comment before walking away, thinking he was all swag, that he got my number. When in reality, he was genuinely creepy, and I gave him a fake number. I thought that would be the end of it. Hours went by, and time felt like it was going in reverse. I wanted to go home. Then the only other stock worker on the job at that hour suddenly walkie-talkied to me, saying there's some creepy-looking guy asking for me. I said, "Oh no," and then told her to tell him I left. I then basically made a beeline for the employee lounge, where I planned on hiding for a while. I made it to the lounge and then sat in one of the seats. Then the double doors opened, and in came that guy. He looked at me, and he looked angry. He yelled, "You gave me a fake number." I think I swallowed my gum out of fear. I said, "You can't be back here, sir." He then took off his backpack and plopped it on the table next to mine. He started unzipping it as he looked at me. That's when it was time for me to go. I got up and ran past him without thinking. He tried to grab my arm, but he failed as I ran through the store. I looked back and saw he was running after me. I ran to the front of the store and outside to my car. It was the only thing I could think to do in the moment. Alternatively, I could have tried finding the male warehouse workers in the back or even the manager, but that was no guarantee. I got to my car and saw the man leave the Walmart, looking for me. He was slow, he must have been on something. He saw my car, but it was too late. I was already driving away. I called the night manager and let him know what just went down and that I'm not comfortable staying there tonight. I also warned him of the man with a backpack full of unknown contents. My manager told me I can't leave the place short-staffed. He said he'd call the police to make sure the man doesn't come back, and he told me I need to come back. I was adamant about not returning that night, though. He eventually got the message and said he'd review the camera footage, but that I need to come back tomorrow night. And I did. He allegedly notified the police the next day of the man and gave the police department the surveillance footage. I met a lot of characters working that job, but this guy was by far the scariest. I don't know what he was reaching for in his backpack. I don't want to either. I worked at Walmart 6 years ago when I was in college. My college schedule was terrible, having classes scattered throughout the day, so finding a job with hours I could consistently work was hard. The Walmart by my campus was open 24 hours and was hiring for the overnight cashier position. Overnight was the only time I knew I could always work and not have to worry about missing class. I took the interview and the job, and for a while, it was going well. It was surprisingly busy throughout the night, but it made time go by faster. I was almost always the only cashier working, so I didn't have any coworkers to talk to unless one of the warehouse guys walked by. After a few months of working, I started to notice the same routine customers coming in. There was this one man in particular that always came around 2 a.m. and would buy random items. Every time he would buy clothes of various sizes and genders, random food, toys, tools, everything. He always came alone, though. He wasn't much of a talker and was very reserved. Just checking out and leaving without saying anything. With nothing better to do, I'd always think about what the guy was up to. I never really thought he was actually up to anything, but my mind would wander sometimes. But then one night, at 2 a.m., like usual, the man came into my checkout lane and to my surprise, he started talking to me. He asked how my night was going and if I had any plans for the weekend. I kept up with the small talk, but was still shocked that he was even talking. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he was definitely on something. He looked extremely tired and his hair was greasy and unkempt, but his eyes were wide open. He paid for his stuff, then thanked me and left. I let my mind wander again, thinking about what the sudden change was. The rest of the night was really slow, dragging on until 6 a.m. when I finally clocked out. The parking lot was mostly empty, and the sun was just starting to rise as I walked to my car. I saw someone was parked next to me with their car on. I got closer, and when I was just a few feet away, a man got out. It was the strange guy that had come in at 2 a.m., which was 4 hours ago. He smiled, looking even more tired than he did earlier. I said hi and walked around to the other side of my car, trying to act normal, but he followed me around to my driver's side door. I told him I had to go home, but that I would see him tomorrow. He didn't say anything but just continued smiling and staring. I opened my door and started to get in, but the guy suddenly grabbed my arm, holding me tight. I looked back at him, and his smile was gone. He forced me out of my car and started pulling me toward his car. I was yelling and fighting back, not letting him pull me more than a few feet before I pushed him down. I hurried inside my car and drove away, checking my mirrors to make sure he didn't follow. I didn't see him, but just in case, I didn't go home and instead parked at a McDonald's and called the police. After they interviewed me and got the case written down, they started investigating. They had some footage on the CCTV in the store and the parking lot. I was hopeful, but after a few weeks, they still didn't have an identity. I continued working and never saw the man again. It makes me sick thinking about all of the stuff he was buying, like clothes of different sizes that I know are probably for other victims he had taken. I'm lucky to have gotten away, but I still feel terrible. Part of me was really hoping he'd come back, though, so that I could attempt to stop him from getting away again. Eventually, the Walmart stopped doing 24 hours, so I lost my job anyway. It's been 6 years, but I hope he got caught somehow or does soon. Working the night shift at Walmart as a night stock person on the weekends was my second job when I was finishing up college. I needed to pay off my loans, so I had to make money however possible. I didn't deal with customers or anything. I would just sign for night deliveries, do warehouse work, and stock shelves in the store during after hours. The typical shift would usually be either 11 to 7 or a 12 to 7. On July 9, 2015, a Thursday night, I still haven't locked into my brain. I was midway through my shift in the electronics department when I saw in the corner of my eye someone walk past the aisle I was working in. This wouldn't usually catch my attention if it weren't for the fact that there were only 2 other workers in the building with me that night, Aaron and Baco. They were both wearing the same staff shirts I was wearing. I would know because we all clocked in at the same time. The person I saw in the corner of my eye was wearing all black, so I naturally walked to the end of the aisle and did a little peep around the shelf. No one was there. I yelled both Aaron and Baco's names, but when they didn't answer, it made it even stranger. Regardless, I went back to work. I was holding in a pee for a while, and I told myself I'd go when I finished work in that aisle. Seconds later, there was a huge crash a few aisles down. It actually startled me. I ran over to see what it was, and a bicycle was somehow knocked off its hook. The hook was still fine and in place. It seemed like someone would have had to put effort into knocking this down. I hung it back up and started walking around the aisles, suspicious as hell. I got to the last aisle towards the back of the store, which was the paper and cleaning aisle. Then, there was this freaky-ass sound that I could best describe as a laugh. It sounded like it came from literally the next aisle over. So, once again, I did a short run back to that aisle and felt my heart drop when I saw a man dressed in all black, waiting by the end of the aisle with his back facing me, but his head turned so that all I saw was only half his face. Then, he suddenly ran, not towards me, but down some other aisle. I heard his footsteps running around. I was faced with a choice of chasing after him or going to find my two coworkers, and I chose the latter. All the while, I heard these freakish laughing sounds and footsteps that I honestly felt like were circling me. I found Aaron in the women's department and told him to be on the lookout for someone who wasn't meant to be in the building, dressed in all black. We didn't have walkie-talkies, so I asked him to tell Baco if he ran into him. I excused myself because I couldn't hold it any longer. I had to go to the bathroom. I ran to the employees-only bathroom, which was in the warehouse section. I put a nest of toilet paper on the seat in one of the stalls and sat down, and yes, I'm the kind of person to sit when I pee. The door to the bathroom opened and closed naturally with 3 to 4 people in the building. I said, "Who is that?" and with no answer. I assumed the worst. I heard that horrific laughing again and someone stepped into view from between the crack in the door. Looking right in. They stepped closer until the crack was completely covered, and all I saw of their face was an eye. Then, the whispering began, unintelligible whispering, but the echo from the bathroom just made it more unsettling. I just remembered I had Aaron's phone number saved on my phone, so I got it out and called him at once. I was very loud with what I was saying, telling Aaron to get to the bathroom at once and help me. I stayed on the line with him and watched as the man on the other side of the stall left one more time, then ran out of the bathroom. I told Aaron to hurry, and 20 to 30 seconds later, Aaron entered the bathroom. He said he didn't see anyone on his way there. We didn't have any security guys working when the store was closed, so we couldn't even go look at the cameras. I stayed by Aaron the rest of the night, helping in whatever sections he was working in, because safety in numbers. I texted my boss that night, and when I woke up at 3 p.m. the next day, I read his response. He said all the camera screens returned static footage from the night before. Nobody went and turned them off as far as he knew. I got chills reading his texts. He believed my story and assumed it was related to the cameras, but with no video proof of the breaking and entering or trespassing, I don't think there was anything he could do. It was all above my pay grade, though. That was the only night shift I've ever had where something truly unexplainable happened. I'm a single dad balancing 2 jobs and 2 kids. Things got a little easier when my eldest son got old enough to watch after my youngest, but working all day makes everything a pain. Anyway, I got home from my second shift around 10, but tomorrow I had another full day of work and I knew I didn't have anything for them to eat while I was gone, so I had to make a quick trip to Walmart. They were the only store around that was open until 11. I got there just before 10:30. I hated to be that customer that walked in right before closing, but I didn't have much of a choice. I went straight over to the grocery section and looked around for some frozen meals for the kids, but after a minute I realized there was someone watching me. It was this creepy-looking man standing on the other side of the aisle. Every time I'd look at him, he would look away, playing dumb, but it was super obvious he was staring at me. I grabbed a couple boxes and went down to the next aisle, but the man followed. I looked back at him and watched as he pretended to look around, occasionally checking if I was still looking at him. He seemed to be in his late 40s, but it was hard to tell because he was wearing a heavy jacket and a hat. "You good?" I said, hoping he'd get the hint to leave me alone. He immediately walked away, not even looking at me again. I thought to myself, he was just some random strange Walmart customer, like you always hear about, and tried to not think about it any more than that. I picked up a box of cereal and some milk, then headed to the self-checkout lane. I kept my eyes open for that man, but he wasn't around anymore. I guessed I really did scare him off. I scanned everything and paid, then walked out. It was dark and the parking lot wasn't very well lit, but from far away I could tell something was off about my car. Walking up to it, there were scratches and dents all over it, and 2 of the windows were shattered. I was in shock. Then I heard footsteps coming up quickly behind me. I turned, seeing 2 men rushing at me, one holding some sort of metal pipe in his hand. I tried getting my keys out and getting in my car, but I realized I was taking too long and took off running instead. I ran straight back to the store and I heard their footsteps stop after a short chase. I watched by the front entrance as they beat in my car some more, then got in a nearby truck and drove away. I of course called 911 and they helped me with my car and giving me a ride home, but nothing could be done about it. At first, a month later, though, the same thing happened to someone else at a different Walmart a few miles away. The man who got attacked was armed and managed to detain one of them, and this eventually led to both men being arrested. One of them I recognized as the man I'd seen looking at me in the store, but I don't know about the other one. Neither gave any reasons worth noting as to why they did it. There's just some sick people out there, but I'm glad these 2 won't be around anymore. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.